Hey guys, tonight we explore the strange, smelly and spectacularly unsafe world of medieval castles. You imagine grand stone towers, royal banquets, maybe a handsome knight or two, right? Well, what if I told you that just stepping into one of these fortresses could spell your doom? The moment you approach, you're greeted by the ominous, gurgling waters of a castle moat. You probably won't survive this, but let's pretend. The moat, for all its muddy charm, isn't there for aesthetics. It's wide, it's deep, and it's filled with things you don't want to identify. People often imagine a picturesque lily pond, maybe a swan drifting serenely, but in reality, it's more of a medieval sewer with ambitions. Think stagnant water, fish bones, the occasional drowned invader, and, if you're unlucky, a few wandering leeches. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from a castle of your own, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see where bedtime history travels tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, already regretting your life choices. The path to the castle winds through overgrown brambles and across a narrow, slippery plank bridge just barely spanning the moat. Your foot slips, a reminder that the water below is not your friend. Historians still argue whether moats were primarily used as defensive barriers or as psychological warfare, but either way, they were a medieval mess. Now, if you were a would-be invader, this is where you'd die first. Not by arrow, not by sword, but by a clumsy splash followed by gasping, slimy regret. Some moats were even filled with sharpened stakes hidden just beneath the surface. Fall in, and you're not just wet. You're shish kebab. And no, crocodiles weren't actually used in moats. Unless you count that one weird 16th century rumour involving Hungarian nobles and exotic pets. Probably exaggerated. Probably, even if you managed to swim it, those castle walls loomed above you, smug and impenetrable. Most moats were built wide enough to keep siege towers and ladders at bay. In some cases, they were dry ditches, cheerily called dry moats, still just as deadly if you fell headfirst into their rocky trenches. Want a broken leg before breakfast? Done. And here's the kicker. Most medieval folks couldn't swim. That wasn't exactly taught at peasant school. So if you tripped and fell into the moat, odds are you went down like a stone. Fully armoured knights fared even worse. All that shining metal. Less knightly glamour, more personal anchor. Moats also served as trash pits. Household waste, kitchen scraps, fish guts, everything ended up in the water. The stench wafted through the air, clinging to your tunic like shame. It wasn't unusual to see rats swimming happily around the rim like tiny plague mermaids. At night, you hear frogs croaking like a choir of the damned. Maybe a splash. Was that a fish? A thief? Or something else? No one checks. The moat keeps its secrets. Some castles had drawbridges built with clever mechanisms that could raise in seconds, leaving invaders stranded mid-leap over the water, or dropping them directly into it. More on that in the next section, but for now you're still staring down the moat, trying not to imagine the texture of the water. One quirky detail, some moats were actually ornamental fish ponds. Castles in parts of France kept carp or trout inside as both a food source and water feature. Imagine fishing your dinner out of a place where you also dumped your latrine buckets. Bon appetit. Still, the moat did its job. It made the castle feel unreachable. And for you, cold, wet, and probably a little panicked, it sets the tone. This isn't your fairy tale fantasy castle. This is a fortress built for war, built to intimidate, and let's be ho, nest, built to trap people, especially the ones who don't watch where they're walking. And as you try to tiptoe across the narrow wooden bridge again, hearing it creak under your weight, you realize the truth of medieval castle life. Getting in is dangerous, and getting out, even worse. The drawbridge groans like an old man with a grudge. Heavy chains rattle as it lowers across the moat, and you step tentatively onto its wooden planks. They flex and creak beneath you, echoing into the darkness like a warning whispered by the past. Welcome to your next death trap, the drawbridge. You might think this mechanism is quaint, like something from a Renaissance fair, but in reality, it's one of the most mechanically intimidating parts of a castle. A huge, counterweighted seesaw of fate, and if you're not careful, it slams down like a guillotine. Imagine you're a messenger, riding hard through the mud with urgent news. As you approach the castle, the drawbridge starts to lower, except too late. It drops with a thunderous crash and your horse rears back, throwing you face first into yesterday's mud. Or worse, you're already crossing and the guards decide you're a threat. With a jerk of a rope and a creak of wood, you're suddenly dangling halfway above the moat, horse screaming, your life flashing before your eyes. Historians still argue whether these bridges were manned constantly or just at scheduled intervals. Either way, timing was everything. Too slow and you risked becoming a moat snack. Too fast and, well, you probably got crushed by the bridge itself. Let's talk mechanics. These drawbridges were operated by winding winches or massive counterweights, often housed in the gatehouse. Turning those wheels required muscle, several men working in sync, usually under immense pressure. If one rope snapped, chaos. There are records of bridge chains whipping loose and decapitating unlucky guards, the medieval version of workplace hazards. And let's not forget, some bridges were trapped on purpose. That's right, booby-trapped drawbridges, where a guard could release a catch and drop the whole thing straight down, sending anyone crossing it into the murky moat below. Kind of like a giant medieval eject button. Now picture the bridge wet from rain. Add a dash of moss. Then imagine galloping across in full armor, slippery, slanted, and suspended over a pit. This isn't transportation. It's a game show obstacle course. But here's a quirky detail. Some bridges doubled as performance stages. Really? During feasts or tournaments, lords and ladies would arrange theatrical welcomes at the drawbridge. Dancers, jesters, and flower-tossing children performed as guests arrived, usually standing right where death could drop at any moment. Nothing says welcome like a 5-ton wooden trapdoor held up by questionable medieval engineering. As you cross, you notice the massive iron teeth rising at the gate's entrance, the portcullis. It's suspended above you, ready to drop like a falling axe at the first sign of trouble. There's a moment where you stand directly beneath it, and the wind hisses through its grated iron bars. Cozy. Drawbridges weren't just outer defences. In some castles, multiple bridges separated layers of fortifications, so even if you made it across one, the next could be lifted behind you. You'd be stuck between gates like a fly in a stone and wood sandwich. Oh, and that space between them, it's called the killing zone. Very on brand. You take another cautious step, hearing your boots squeak on the damp timber. The wind shifts. The chains creak ominously. You pause and glance up at the mechanisms above. Are those ropes fraying? You remember that bridge in Caernarfon Castle that collapsed during maintenance back in the early 1300s? No battles, no siege, just bad timing and poor construction. Even castles in times of peace could betray their own people. And yet you press forward, because stopping in the middle is worse. The guards eye you suspiciously from their arrow slits. One of them coughs, another spits. You're a visitor, maybe even a guest, but you don't feel welcome. You feel like bait. Joke's on you, though. The real danger isn't behind you or ahead. It's under your feet. The drawbridge was never meant to feel safe. Its creaks are deliberate. Its groans are part of the architecture. It keeps you alert. It keeps you slow. One wrong step, one bad timing moment, and it becomes your coffin lid. You finally reach the other side, heart thumping, palms sweaty, ears tuned to every creak and clang. The portcullis rises slowly as you pass beneath it, like the jaws of a monster reluctantly letting you through. And just when you think the worst is behind you, you hear the sudden slam of the drawbridge lifting behind you, cutting off escape. Welcome inside. The castle's hungry. You step inside the gatehouse and instantly regret it. Above your head looms a tunnel of dark stone, echoing with the whisper of wind and the distant rattle of chains. It feels like you've entered the throat of a slumbering beast. The light fades behind you, swallowed by the rising portcullis, and you notice small openings in the ceiling, harmless at first glance like medieval skylights. But don't be fooled. You've just entered the realm of murder holes. The name isn't poetic, it's literal. These gaps carved into the ceiling above castle entrances were designed for one thing: making intruders very, very dead. At first you only notice the chill. The walls seem to close in, the ceiling lowers, your boots click on the stone floor as you glance upward, eyes adjusting to the dimness. Then it hits you. Anyone standing above those holes could dump almost anything on you. Boiling water, hot sand, burning pitch, even rocks, bricks, or actual sewage. If it fits, it drops. Welcome to medieval hospitality. Historians still argue whether oil was really used in murder holes. It's one of those historical myths people love to repeat, but practical evidence is lacking, mostly because oil was expensive and fire was unpredictable. So hot sand or scalding water? Way more likely. But does it matter? When you're beneath one, every drip feels suspicious. Imagine storming the castle with your fellow rebels. You're charging in, adrenaline pumping, sword raised, and then splash. Your helmet fills with sludge. You slip on the oily stone floor. More importantly, your momentum is gone. You're now just a wet, panicked target, exactly as planned. And here's a fun fact. Some castles used bees. That's right, buzzing, angry, medieval bees. There are records, possibly exaggerated, of defenders hurling hives down through the murder holes onto attackers. Historians remain divided on whether this act really happened, or if it's just a favourite tale from overcaffeinated chroniclers. But still, would you take that risk? One overlooked detail: murder holes weren't always lethal. Sometimes they were used more for intimidation, spooking intruders with smoke or strange smells. Drop a bucket of goat's blood or a dead rat or two, and boom, morale drop. As you edge forward, the light returns and you start to breathe again. But the silence up there, that's the most unnerving part. You don't know what's waiting. Was that a whisper, or just the wind threading through ancient stone? A guard above might be watching, peering down through a slit you can't even see. They're quiet, they don't move. But they could. And that possibility, that silent threat, is what gives the murder hole its power. The gatehouse was designed as a death funnel. Even if attackers breached the drawbridge, they'd be stuck in a long, narrow passage lined with arrow slits, overhanging holes and flanked by guards. It's called a barbican, and it's basically the castle saying, "You sure about this?" You shiver, not from cold, but from instinct. Every nerve in your body knows this place is built to kill. The stone sweats damp history. You imagine centuries of warriors and travellers passing through this very tunnel, some celebrated, others never seen again. Let's not forget, defenders sometimes used psychological tactics here, echoing noises, eerie chants, and even mannequins dressed in armour to trick the Iron Heart. One chronicler claimed that invaders would sometimes see flickering torches above and mistake them for hundreds of defenders, when really it was 5 kids with fire sticks and a few well-placed murder holes. You reach the end of the corridor. The inner courtyard lies ahead, but before you move forward, you glance back, one last time, up at those openings. They're empty now, silent, but they're still there, waiting, watching. And deep down, you know you're not the first to pass through, and not all who did passed out again. The courtyard opens before you, a cluttered patchwork of wagons, stray chickens, muddy footprints, and distant hammering from the smithy. You take a few cautious steps and glance around. Ah, fresh air. No murder holes overhead, no moat water squelching in your boots. Finally, something safe, or so you think. You notice a narrow stone tower to your right, a twisting stairwell climbing into darkness. Maybe the Lord's chambers. Maybe the lookout post. Curiosity, that old troublemaker, gets the better of you. You decide to climb. And this, dear listener, is where the castle's real treachery begins, the spiral staircase. It starts off innocently enough. You ascend, each step worn smooth by centuries of armored feet. The staircase coils upward like a corkscrew, hugging the tower's inner wall. The spiral turns clockwise, which seems like a random architectural quirk, until you realize it's not. It's a trap. Most medieval castle staircases spiral in one direction, for a very calculated reason. Right-handed defenders could swing their swords freely coming down the stairs, but attackers, ascending in a clockwise spiral, would find their sword arms pinned against the central column. Advantage: defenders. You try swinging your arm experimentally. Yep, awkward. Now try it with a 4-foot broadsword and a guy yelling in Norman French at the top. Even worse, there are no handrails. The steps are uneven in height and depth. Some are intentionally made shorter or taller to trip unfamiliar feet. Some steps are crumbling, others tilt. It's a vertical maze designed to break your rhythm and possibly your ankle. The walls are damp with condensation. Light fades quickly and shadows stretch like lazy predators. You brush a cobweb away from your face, then immediately regret wondering what spun it. The air smells like dust, old straw, and something faintly metallic. Maybe blood, maybe rust. In a medieval castle, the two often overlap. A rat scampers past your boot. You both scream a little. Halfway up, your legs burn. The steps feel narrower. You lean against the wall for support, but even that is treacherous. Tiny holes hide archers who might still be watching. You realize how vulnerable this climb makes you, trapped in a stone coil, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Historians still debate whether these staircases were primarily tactical defenses or just clever space-saving solutions. Maybe both. But either way, they were never built for comfort. They were built to slow, disorient, and punish. You reach a small landing, barely a nook carved into the wall. A wooden door blocks the way forward. The latch is rusted and uninviting. You hesitate. There's a faint draft coming from behind the door, and with it, the scent of burnt tallow and mildew. A quirky tidbit for you. Some castles built secret staircases within the walls for servants and spies, hidden access routes that bypassed the main tower. If you didn't know where they were, you'd never find them, and if you did find one by accident, you might never find your way out again. Back to your spiral death tube. You continue up. The light from below fades completely, and now you're relying on instinct and one flickering torch mounted on a rusty bracket. The flame sways as you pass, casting unsettling shapes along the curved wall. One shadow looks suspiciously like a person holding a sword. You blink. It's gone. At last you reach the top. Your knees crack in protest, and your breath fogs in the chill. A final step opens onto a small watch platform, exposed to the wind. From here, the castle sprawls below you, a tangled geometry of towers, courtyards, and clustered roofs. You made it. Alive, barely. But as you rest, you glance back down that spiral staircase. It stares up at you, endless, winding, predatory. You realize descending will be worse. You'll face the outer wall, no visual depth, and slippery edges. One misstep, and you're tumbling all the way down like a sack of potatoes. The spiral has claimed many before you. It remembers their names. You finally descend from the dizzying tower, wobbling slightly, like someone who just rode a donkey blindfolded through a thunderstorm. Your knees ache, your balance is questionable, but the view was worth it. Sort of. At least you didn't fall down the stairs. Yet. You wander back into the courtyard and notice narrow vertical slits carved into the outer walls. They look harmless, decorative even, like architectural eyeliner. But these are no innocent windows. These are arrow slits, or loopholes, as they were called, and they are not on your side. From inside, a crossbowman or longbow archer has a perfect shot. From the outside, you have a very small hole to look at and wonder who's pointing death in your direction. You edge closer to one, curious. Just wide enough to peer through at an angle, the interior carved into a cone to allow maximum movement from within. You peek in. Empty. For now. But imagine, just for a moment, that you're an invader. You've just made it past the drawbridge. The murder holes have been kind. No hot tar bath for you today. You take a step into the courtyard, confident. Then, thwick, an arrow tears through your arm from a slit you didn't even notice. These arrow slits were everywhere. Gatehouses, stairwells, walls, even beside the privies. Some had little shutters for weather. Others were angled to provide overlapping fields of fire. You were never truly safe. The castle could see you, but you couldn't see them. Historians still argue whether certain wider slits were adapted for early gunpowder weapons or remained purely for archers. Either way, standing in line with one for too long was basically asking to become a kebab. And here's a fun medieval tidbit. Some arrow slits were decorated, sculpted into crosses, flowers, or stylized shields. Artistic murder. Imagine catching an arrow through a fleur-de-lis. Stylish and fatal. You keep walkers. Eyes now scanning every crack in the wall. Are you being watched? You try to act casual, like you're just a tourist admiring old rocks, but the hair on your neck doesn't lie. You feel the gaze. Suddenly a thunk echoes from the far wall. Just a practice shot maybe, or maybe someone's testing their aim. Arrow slits had another sinister use, spreading panic. You'd hear the whistle of arrows but never see where they came from, like some ghostly archer was haunting the walls. And once fear set in, attackers would break formation, scatter, and become easy targets. And while we're on the subject, crossbows, not toys, they packed enough punch to drive a bolt through chainmail, leather, and a bad attitude. Their use was so brutal that Pope Innocent II banned them in 1139, at least for wars between Christians. Against anyone else? Go wild. You duck behind a cart just in case. A goat eyes you suspiciously. It knows something you don't. Another neat detail. Defenders inside the castle often rotated through different slits, never firing from the same one twice. It gave the illusion of more archers than there really were. Psychological warfare by peekaboo. And while you admire the tactical brilliance, you also wonder how many unfortunate guests or servants were caught in the crossfire. Not everyone inside the castle was on the defense team. Some were just trying to deliver soup. You pass by one particularly elaborate slit. It's shaped like a crucifix, with an extra horizontal slit below. This one's for a crossbow, and the lower line for aiming downward. Imagine being a foot soldier with that above your head. You glance back at the courtyard, sun slanting through the clouds, pigeons fluttering past. Peaceful now. But in its day, this space was a kill zone, and the arrow slits made it so. And you're just one more figure moving through the crosshairs. You've made it past the moat, the murder holes, and the malicious staircases. You've even survived the stares of invisible archers. For a moment you feel like a survivor. Then the ground vanishes beneath your foot. You lurch forward, heart punching your ribs, but the floor catches you, barely. A creaky wooden panel shifts under your boot, then settles. Nothing happens. Yet. You freeze. Congratulations. You've just met the trapdoor. Castles loved these things. Disguised as floorboards, covered by straw or hidden beneath rugs in the Lord's Hall, trapdoors were one of the castle's nastiest little surprises. Step on the wrong board, and down you'd go, sometimes into a prison, sometimes into a pit, and sometimes into something much worse. You step back slowly. A guard walks past and smirks, like he knows. Maybe he does. These weren't cartoon-style trapdoors with springs and levers. No, they were often controlled by ropes and pulleys, opened at just the right moment by someone nearby. 1 second you're standing on solid ground, the next, gravity betrays you. And where do you fall? Welcome to the oubliette, from the French oublier, meaning to forget. That's not poetic, it's literal. A deep, narrow dungeon with no door, just a hole at the top. You're dropped in and left there. Days, weeks, or longer. No ladder, no light, no plumbing, just you, your thoughts, and maybe the bones of whoever was there before you. Historians still debate whether oubliettes were used regularly or if they were symbolic, reserved for high-value prisoners or dramatic threats. But one thing's clear, falling into one was not an invitation to tea. Sometimes the fall alone was fatal, others were designed shallow enough to keep you alive, just barely. Food might be tossed down now and then, or not. You press on, hugging the wall now, testing each step with paranoid precision. A servant girl walks past carrying a basket of turnips. She steps on the same board and nothing. Maybe it was your imagination, or maybe she knows the safe path. Trapdoors weren't limited to floors. Some were built into ceilings. Picture a secret chamber above, with soldiers lying in wait. The panel opens and they drop down with spears, like medieval ninjas. Surprise! Some castles even had false stairs, a few steps that looked solid but collapsed under weight, sending victims tumbling into hidden chambers or spiked pits. Yes, actual spikes, because the medieval imagination was nothing if not thorough. And remember, lighting in castles was limited. Flickering torchlight creates shadows. You're constantly guessing, does that shadow mean depth, or just a trick of the flame? It keeps you hesitant, uncertain. And that's exactly how the castle wants you. One quirky tidbit. In certain castles, pets were trained to avoid dangerous paths. Dogs, cats, even falcons knew where not to step. So if you ever visit a medieval castle and spot the dog walking a strange zigzag pattern, follow it. Suddenly, you notice a square of stone on the wall, too regular to be natural. It's slightly ajar. A secret panel? You press your fingers to it, expecting adventure. Instead, it opens to a brick wall. Not every secret leads somewhere, but some do. Hidden tunnels, escape routes, priest holes, servant passages. Castles were riddled with architectural secrets. A clever noble might use a trapdoor to slip into a corridor and flee, or to appear mysteriously behind an enemy during a siege. Dramatic entrances were practically required. Still, your heart doesn't slow. Every step feels like a test. You start to mistrust the floor, the walls, even the air. The castle is a labyrinth that wants to eat you. You pass by an iron grate in the floor, too heavy to lift. Below, something glistens. You bend closer. Just water. Or is it? The smell hits you. Rot, mildew, and something metallic. You stand up fast. Best not to know. And as you continue walking, you realize something truly unsettling. You don't remember which way you came. Every hallway looks the same. Every torch burns just a little too low. You are not lost. The castle knows exactly where you are. You're rattled now. The floor isn't your friend. The ceiling might be plotting against you, and every corridor seems like it's daring you to trust it. You stumble toward the main hall. Maybe there's safety in people, in warm food, in candlelight. But what greets you is worse than murder holes or oubliettes. It's the kitchen. Specifically, it's the medieval banquet, and you, dear listener, are about to flirt with food poisoning like it's the Lord's daughter. Long wooden tables stretch across the great hall, overflowing with trenchers of steaming stew, glazed meat pies, roasted swans, yes, swans, and flagons of wine. It looks glorious. Your stomach growls. Maybe you've found a little comfort at last. Think again. You sit, you take a bite, and then you pause. The stew tastes off. Is that mutton? Or yesterday's fish with a disguise? It's hard to say. There's a strange texture, something between a bone fragment and regret. You sip the wine. It's warm, spiced, and... Wait, is that almond? Oh no. You know what almond means in medieval cuisine? Poison. Historians still argue whether poisonings were common in noble households or just the paranoid fantasy of chroniclers. But it's no stretch to imagine rival lords slipping a little powdered nightshade into someone's goblet. Or, more realistically, food just going bad. No refrigeration, limited hygiene, tons of spices meant to cover up something. The kitchens, often located far from the dining halls due to fire risk, were chaos incarnate. Fires raged in open hearths. grease splattered from hanging pans. Knives, sharpened, enormous, flew from butcher to boy to cook and back. A scullery maid once slipped and took out a visiting scribe with a goose carcass. True story. Probably. And don't even ask about hand washing. Most of it was symbolic. You dipped your fingers into scented water before eating, not to clean them, just to purr. Etend you did. Bon appetit. Even the serving vessels were dangerous. Trencher plates were made of stale bread, soaked through with grease and meat juice. Not always eaten, sometimes given to the poor after the meal. Or rats, or mould, and knives were shared. Forks barely existed, and you'd be lucky if the salt cellar hadn't already been used as a chamber pot. Yes, really, at least once. And no, we won't talk about it again. Here's a quirky little tidbit. Nobles employed food tasters. People whose entire job was to nibble a bit of every dish to make sure it wasn't poisoned. But if you're not nobility, like you're on your own. You roll the dice with every bite. You spot a meat pie. It's golden brown and smells like heaven. You cut into it and something moves, not in a haunted kind of way, more in a still alive kind of way. The medieval cook's version of dinner and a show, pies filled with live birds or frogs that burst out when sliced open. A surprise? Yes. Delightful? Questionable. You drink more wine, partly to wash it all down, partly to numb your growing concern. But beware, alcohol in medieval times was unreliable. Brewing was imprecise. Sometimes beer was flat, sour, or worse, accidentally laced with ergot or stored in lead-glazed jugs. So yes, you might hallucinate before dessert. Still hungry? Dessert is a gamble too. Candied fruit, spiced honey cakes, marzipan shaped like little hedgehogs, adorable and probably full of weevils. If sugar was used, it was likely cut with something, maybe chalk, maybe flour, maybe sand. And then there's the after-dinner ritual, purging. That's right. Some nobles ate so much they'd retire to a private room just to vomit, and then return for more. Not because they were ill, but because they considered it classy. Historians refer to it gently as induced regurgitation. We refer to it as no thanks. As you rise from the table, stomach churning, you realize something sobering. You might not die in battle. You might not fall into a trapdoor or get shot through an arrow slit. But you will eat something that tries to kill you. And that's just Tuesday at a medieval banquet. You stagger out of the banquet hall like a defeated gladiator, one hand on your belly, the other gripping a wobbling goblet of mystery wine. You're full, you're dizzy, and you're 92% sure something in that meat pie was still blinking. You breathe in fresh air. Big mistake. Because now, dear traveller, you've wandered too close to the castle latrines, and this next death trap isn't designed to kill you directly, but you still might wish it had. At first, you don't realize what you're seeing. Just a quiet stone alcove jutting out from the castle wall. A narrow wooden seat. A little hole. Then the smell hits. It's a thick, ancient stench. Earthy, damp, and horrifyingly warm. Your eyes water. Your nose curls in betrayal. You've just discovered the medieval marvel known as the guardrobe. To be clear, this was a toilet. A very primitive, gravity-based toilet. It consisted of a stone shaft or wooden chute projecting from the castle wall, with a seat at the top and, well, nothing below but the cruel hand of fate. Beneath you, a pit. Maybe a cesspool. Maybe a moat. Maybe just open air and unlucky peasants. Waste dropped down the shaft, sometimes splashing into water, sometimes just collecting over time until someone got the short straw and had to shovel it out. You peer down the hole. It's deep, black, endless. Somewhere down there, a gurgle echoes back up, like a medieval ghost saying, "Don't look at me." The real danger? These latrines were external. Sticking off the edge of the wall, they were vulnerable to siege damage and accidental slips. One loose stone, one gust of wind while your pants are down, and congratulations, you just became a historical footnote. Historians still argue whether guardrobes were regularly cleaned or simply left to become horrifying vertical compost heaps. Most agree that maintenance was minimal at best. A 15th century account describes the constant stench in one French fortress that made the corridor tremble. Poetry, really. And don't assume there was one latrine for everyone. Oh no. The Lord had his private stone closet, maybe with a padded seat if he was fancy. Servants, shared wooden benches, soldiers, a plank over a trench if they were lucky, or just the nearest wall if they weren't. There's even a quirky tale from a castle in Germany where 2 enemy spies climbed into the guardrobe chute, hoping to sneak into the keep. One slipped. The other reportedly gave up halfway and cried himself to sleep. Did they survive? Historians remain unsure. The shame likely finished what gravity didn't. And here's the cruel irony. Sometimes defenders dumped hot sand or even burning pitch down the guardrobe shaft during sieges, knowing that enemies might be climbing up. Death by flaming sewage. There's a phrase you'll never forget. You step away from the latrine carefully, avoiding the puddles of something. You think you hear a faint plop and move faster. The stones here are damp and slippery. Not because of rain, but because centuries of unfortunate plumbing choices have seeped into the walls. A few steps later, you find another risk. Guardrobe chutes above you. Yes, sometimes these medieval toilets were stacked vertically. You're casually strolling under a second-story latrine and don't even realize it. Then, splat, right on your shoulder. It's just rain. You hope it's rain. And while we're here, let's talk about the medieval concept of cleanliness. Bathing was infrequent, water was cold, soap was scarce, chamber pots were often dumped out windows with a shout of garde à l'eau, meaning watch out for the water, which was less a warning and more of a courtesy scream before impact. You find a quiet alcove and sit, wiping your boots on a tuft of moss that definitely wasn't moss. The breeze shifts, carrying the pungent perfume of the latrine tower back to you. Your stomach churns again, possibly because of the stew, possibly because you just saw a rat fall down the guardrobe shaft. And that, my brave guest, is the reality of castle life. You can survive the arrows, outsmart the traps, dodge boiling oil, but when nature calls, the castle calls louder. You're still recovering from the trauma of the latrine tower when you spot something new, something almost beautiful. A spiraling staircase, carved neatly into the thick stone walls, lit by tiny slits of daylight. You pause at its base, boots planted on worn stone, heart doing a cautious little jig. This might be the most peaceful part of the castle you've seen, but of course it's not. These aren't just any stairs. These are spiral staircases, and they were built with one glorious purpose: to mess with your sense of direction and get you killed at the same time. As you begin your ascent, you quickly notice something odd. The stairwell is tight, almost claustrophobic. You have to turn your body sideways just to fit. Your sword, if you were foolish enough to bring one, is smacking the walls with every step. Your right arm's crushed against the central column. See, spiral staircases in castles almost always turn clockwise as they go up. The reason? Defense. A right-handed attacker, like 90% of the population, would find it nearly impossible to swing their sword effectively on such stairs. Meanwhile, the defender coming down the stairs, they'd have the center to their left, their sword hand free, and a wide arc for slicing, like shooting fish in a bucket. If the bucket were vertical and made of stone and you were the fish. This strategic curve was genius. But it also made spiral stairs ridiculously dangerous, even in peacetime. The steps were intentionally uneven, some shallow, some steep, to trip enemies unfamiliar with them, which meant castle residents spent years trying not to trip on their own stairs. You pause halfway up and lean on the central pillar. It's worn smooth. Centuries of anxious hands have done that. The air is tight here, stale. You feel like you're climbing the inside of a seashell made by someone who really didn't want you getting to the top. There's a scholarly debate still unresolved about whether these staircases were standardized across all regions or adapted castle by castle based on specific threats. Some believe Scottish castles reversed the spiral to suit left-handed defenders, Others argue that local masons just got tired of walking the same direction every time. And it's not just the stairs design that'll get you. These towers were dark. The only light came from narrow arrow slits, just enough to glimpse your next step, not enough to notice the rat waiting there, or the bat, or the puddle of mysterious slime that just made you slip back 2 steps with a yelp that echoed like a ghost's giggle. One fringe detail you might appreciate: spiral staircases sometimes had deliberate murder holes carved into the wall, little slots for defenders to jab spears, pour boiling oil, or toss down heavy rocks. Imagine that. You're running up these stairs, already winded, and suddenly a hot rock the size of a pineapple lands on your face. You're panting now, the sweat sticking to your collar. You grip the rope railing, if there even is one, and press on, higher, step after step. The walls feel closer. Your knees ache. You begin to realize why castle inhabitants had very strong legs and very short tempers. Near the top, a gust of wind whistles down the shaft. It sounds almost like laughter. You've climbed 100 steps, avoided death at least 3 times, and now the ceiling's just a little too low. You duck instinctively. Good move. Many stairways were designed to force invaders to hunch or crawl near the exit, making them easy to club like overambitious moles. You emerge into a cramped chamber. Finally, the top. You're greeted not by a glorious view or even a fresh breeze, but by a guard giving you the side eye as he munches on something unidentifiable. You realize with some dread that you've entered a watchtower and you'll need to go back down soon. You lean against the wall and gaze out through the slits. The countryside looks peaceful, almost serene. Rolling hills, little villages, fluffy sheep, until you remember that each sheep might be carrying fleas, and each village likely dumped its waste directly into the river. Sleepy, yes. Sanitary? Absolutely not. Below, the staircase yawns open again. You swallow hard. Going down might actually be worse. Narrow footing, slippery moss, and the ever-present possibility that the stairs builder had a dark sense of humour and made the last step just a little too steep. You start your descent, slowly, carefully, each footstep echoing like the tick of an ancient clock. One wrong move and you won't just trip, you'll cartwheel your way into the next ghost story. By now, your legs are trembling, your breath's shallow, and your socks, if you had any, are definitely ruined. But you've made it back to the ground floor, and for a fleeting moment, the nightmare feels over. Until you hear something strange, the low rumble of wood against stone, a grinding groan like the castle itself is clearing its throat. You follow the sound through a narrow hall, duck beneath a sagging timber beam, and suddenly you're in the castle's main entryway. And you're looking at the portcullis, a spiked iron gate suspended above the entrance, dangling like a giant guillotine held up by one final breath of faith and fraying rope. You've seen one in a movie, right? That dramatic moment when the portcullis drops just in time to stop the enemy charge. In real life, though, it's even worse. These heavy iron or wooden grids were winched up and down, sometimes weighing hundreds of pounds. And if you happened to be walking underneath when it malfunctioned, well, let's just say your nickname would become Sir Flattened. Portcullises were designed for quick deployment in emergencies. Some were released by cutting a rope, others by yanking a lever hidden in the gatehouse above. The goal was to trap intruders in the entry tunnel like rats in a cage. But the genius of the design was its cruelty. While they were stuck under the portcullis, archers and crossbowmen could fire through the slots. Boiling oil, too. Maybe some beehives if the guards were feeling creative. And the real kicker? There was often another portcullis waiting on the other end of the tunnel. It was a classic trap. Get enemies inside, then seal both ends and attack from the sides through murder slits. You might remember those from earlier. Narrow openings just wide enough to shoot, stab, or insult through. Historians still argue whether portcullises were used more frequently as active defense mecha. Nisms or symbolic deterrents, kind of like hanging a beware of dogs sign when your dog is actually a toothless terrier. But one thing's clear, when they did drop, they dropped fast, and maintenance virtually non-existent. Wooden tracks could rot, chains could snap, levers could jam, so even castle residents were nervous walking beneath one. There's an amusing fringe account from a 14th century English manor where the portcullis reportedly dropped during a wedding procession. The bride made it through. The groom, not so lucky. The rest of the ceremony was abbreviated. As you inch closer, you realize that underneath the raised gate, the stone is worn smooth, marked by centuries of boots. People had no choice but to walk under it, even knowing it could fall at any moment. It's the medieval equivalent of standing beneath a grand piano suspended by dental floss. You decide not to linger. But the portcullis wasn't the only hazard at the castle's threshold. Look above and you'll spot machicolations, stone platforms with holes in the floor hanging out over the entrance. These were used for vertical attacks. Imagine someone tossing down stones, boiling pitch, or worse, week-old chamber pot contents right as you walked in. The message was clear. Welcome to the castle. Duck. Of course, sometimes attackers would try to burn the portcullis down. So defenders reinforced them with iron bands, which made them fireproof but also heavier, and more likely to splinter your skull if you weren't paying attention during your stroll. You step gingerly into the entry tunnel, trying not to imagine what might be lurking above. It's narrow by design. The ceiling's low, the walls close in, and every creak of wood or clatter of chain makes you flinch. If you were wearing armor, this would be a very bad time to discover you've gained a few pounds. Some castles had an extra feature here, a drop trap. That's right, hidden doors in the ceiling that could release a surprise payload of stones or spikes. Historians debate whether these were commonly used or mostly architectural flexes. Either way, you'd better not look up too long. A chill drifts through the corridor, and your steps echo like slow drum beats. The gatehouse above, where the portcullis is controlled, is manned by sleepy guards, or perhaps just dust and spiders now. But in its day, it was a hive of activity. Wheels cranking, pulleys creaking, defenders shouting orders, timing the drop of a portcullis team. Coordination. There were tales of it missing its mark, dropping too late or too early and trapping the wrong people. Like that poor baker in Flanders who stepped out for a smoke break and came back with half a ladder sticking out of his chest. You pick up the pace, you're through the gate now, out in the courtyard, you glance back, and just as you do, you hear a clunk. The portcullis shudders, settles slightly in its tracks. You didn't touch anything, probably just the wind, probably. Now that you've survived the portcullis, barely, it would be nice to think things calm down inside the courtyard. A few pigeons flutter by, there's a faded garden on one side, maybe a well, maybe even a curious cat who doesn't know any better. For one soft second, it feels like a castle could be peaceful. But then you step toward the inner keep and find yourself staring at a set of stairs. Not just any stairs. These are spiral staircases, and they twist so tightly it feels like you've wandered into the world's most medieval parking garage. Up, and up again, each step narrower than the last, as if designed specifically to sprain your ankle. Why spiral? Why so steep? Why so dark? You ask these questions, and the castle answers, because you weren't supposed to enjoy the climb. You were supposed to die on it. See, medieval spiral staircases were intentionally designed to be narrow and winding, usually clockwise. This gave a serious advantage to defenders fighting from above. If you were coming up with a sword in your right hand, as most soldiers did, the wall on your right would cramp your swing, while defenders above could slash freely over the central column. Ingenious and infuriating. And let's not forget that in armour, these stairs were even more of a nightmare. Weighted down by chainmail or plate, you'd be winded after 4 turns. You'd trip, fall, probably take your comrades down with you like a metal bowling ball. If you ever wondered what death by staircase looked like, this was it. Loud, clunky, and full of bruises. Historians still argue whether every castle used spiral stairs with these clockwise kill zones, or whether some were just built that way because the architect had a bad sense of direction. Some exceptions exist, particularly in France, where staircases wind counterclockwise, possibly for left-handed lords, or just to confuse invaders. But in GE's Narration, if you were storming a tower, you were spiraling into trouble. You begin your ascent. The first few steps feel manageable, but soon your calves are screaming. The walls tighten, your shoulder scrapes old stone, and your breath echoes in the enclosed chamber. There's no railing. One false move and you're tumbling backward like a sack of bad decisions. As you rise, you notice arrow slits in the stone, thin vertical openings carved into the wall. Originally, they allowed defenders to fire arrows or crossbow bolts down at attackers without exposing themselves. The slits are deceptively small on the outside, but widen inside to allow a wide angle of fire. They also serve another purpose, ventilation. If the tower caught fire, which wasn't uncommon in sieges, the slits let smoke out, and sometimes screams. Near the top, you spot a strange protrusion in the wall, a bar hole, where a wooden bar could be slotted to lock a door. If things got bad upstairs, defenders could seal off the stairwell entirely. Anyone trapped inside would have nowhere to go but down, quickly. And if you're wondering, yes, people did fall. There's a rather tragic tale from a Welsh castle where a servant carrying wine for a feast tripped halfway up and rolled back down all 4 stories. He survived, but only because he landed in a pig trough at the base. His pride, however, did not. Suddenly, the stairs change. The steps become uneven, one slightly taller than the others. A trap? Quite possibly. Castle builders often introduced irregularities on purpose to throw off attackers. In the panic of a siege, rushing up stairs that aren't all the same height was like trying to run through a funhouse, except instead of laughter, it ended in your legs snapping like a medieval wishbone. You rest your hand on the wall for balance and feel something odd. Scratches, carved initials, signs of life, or maybe signs of someone trying to claw their way back down. A torch sconce flickers beside your face, though no one lit it. A trick of the wind, maybe, or just the building exhaling centuries of stored panic. Finally, you reach the top of the stairs and find yourself in a narrow hallway. The ceiling is low, probably to make swinging a sword up here difficult. There's a door ahead, reinforced with iron bands and a big, mean-looking lock. You're in the solar, the Lord's private chamber, or what's left of it. It's warmer here, faintly. There may even be a feather bed, which feels downright luxurious. But don't let the cushions fool you. Even here, in the most civilized part of the castle, safety was an illusion. Stone walls trapped heat in summer and froze you in winter. The fireplace smoked constantly. Rats had diplos. Matic immunity. And there were only so many tapestries to soften the gloom. But hey, at least you're not walking anymore. Still, you can't shake the feeling that the stairs are behind you, watching, waiting, one step away from betraying your ankles once more. The door to the solar creaks behind you, sealing you inside what should be the safest room in the keep. Should be, but in a medieval castle, safe is just a polite word for still extremely inconvenient to die in. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you notice the details. Stone floors with old rushes strewn about, maybe some tattered animal skins for decoration. A small writing desk squats in the corner like it's ashamed to be here. There's a bed, a real bed, with a canopy, likely crawling with generations of flea aristocracy. And near the hearth, a rickety chair that's definitely seen things. This, dear listener, is the Lord's chamber, and while it might seem fancy compared to the rat-infested guard towers, it too was filled with its own hazards. Take, for example, the fireplace. It was meant to warm the room, of course, but stone chimneys in castles were early designs, meaning they frequently smoked, backdrafted, or just coughed soot into everything you owned. You didn't get warmth so much as an indoor fog machine. If you fell asleep too close, you might not wake up at all. You move closer and notice something odd. The flue is offset, crooked as a drunk monk. That was no accident. Castle builders often kinked chimneys on purpose to slow down the wind gusts or stop enemy archers from firing flaming arrows down the shaft. Clever? Yes. Effective. Sort of. Dangerous. Always. You wander past the bed, eyeing the woven tapestries on the wall, depicting, ironically, hunting scenes and victories over invaders who probably met their end on one of those awful staircases. These hangings weren't just for show, they helped with insulation. Thick cloth kept the cold stone walls from sucking every ounce of warmth out of your bones. But they were also terribly flammable, so, in case the chimney didn't kill you, the decor might. In one corner sits a garderobe, a medieval toilet. It's just a stone bench with a hole leading to a shaft that plunges down the side of the castle wall or into a cesspit below. The odour alone could knock out a grown man, especially in the warmer months. And the shaft wasn't just a way to dispose of waste. It could also be an accidental entry point for invaders. There are real stories of soldiers crawling up garderobe chutes to sneak into castles. Yes, up the poop chute. Desperation is a powerful thing. You peek inside, then immediately regret it. The air is thick. There's movement. Something squeaks. You back away. Historians still argue whether garderobes doubled as defensive features. Some believe they could be used as surprise exits or drop points for boiling liquid. Others argue they were just disgusting and ignored unless absolutely necessary. Either way, they're a reminder that even luxury was just one bad decision away from pestilence. You notice a bundle tucked in the corner near the bed, a chamber pot, more intimate than the garderobe and infinitely more gross. This was your nighttime toilet, and if you're lucky, it was emptied by a servant. If not, well, that smell wasn't the stew from dinner. From your new perch in the Lord's chamber, you peer out a narrow, mullioned window. The view is stunning. Rolling hills, perhaps a river snaking through the valley, or maybe just more fog. But the window itself is a trap. Glass was rare, expensive, and usually replaced with oiled cloth or horn. And because windows were so small and high up, built more to resist arrows than invite sunlight, you couldn't exactly leap out of them to escape, which, considering the height, is probably a good thing. A chill creeps into the room. It's summer outside, but in here, it always feels like October. You pull a wool blanket off the bed and instantly get a face full of dust and moth. It smells like centuries of bad decisions and someone's grandmother. Even the very design of the room encourages isolation. Thick walls, muffled sound so much that the Lord could be yelling for help and no one would hear him. Add to that the risk of assassination, a poisoned cup, a dagger in the night, and you begin to understand that sleeping in the best room of the castle still came with a short life expectancy. There's a tale from a Scottish keep where a lord was murdered in his bed, not by enemies, but by his own cook, who got tired of preparing mutton stew every day. That may or may not be exaggerated, but the risk of internal betrayal was real. Many castles kept guards stationed inside the solar itself, not just outside the door. You take a seat by the fire, or what remains of it. The embers glow faintly, casting flickering shadows on the cracked flagstones. A breeze whistles down the chimney again, this time carrying the faint scent of something metallic? You can't tell. It's just the castle breathing. Outside, the courtyard is still. The guards have changed shift. The torches crackle faintly. But you're not quite ready to sleep. You look around the chamber one last time, and your eyes catch on the trapdoor in the ceiling. Ah yes, the old escape hatch to the roof, or possibly to the attic where bats and old armour live in eternal torment. You climb the ladder, slowly, quietly, because you never know if the ladder's original. Most weren't, and many broke at the worst possible time. The hatch creaks open, and suddenly you're up on the battlements staring into the night sky. Stars twinkle above a countryside soaked in history, violence and horse manure. It's beautiful, it's haunting, it's windy, and if you don't duck soon, you're going to get hit by the night shift's slop bucket sailing out a murder hole. The wind on the battlements cuts through your cloak like a knife. Up here, above the sleeping castle, you're closer to the stars than to the floor, closer to cold air and curses than comfort. Welcome to the defensive rooftop, the final frontier between survival and siege. The walkway beneath your boots is narrow, flanked by crenellations, those notched stone blocks you've seen 100 times in every medieval drawing. They were designed for battle. You duck behind the solid part, the merlon, then step out between the gaps, the embrasures, to loose arrows, pour boiling oil, or yell insults, sometimes all three at once. Crenellations weren't just symbolic of status, they were functional kill zones, but not without danger. Many a guard leaned too far over an embrasure and found himself suddenly at eye level with the chickens. Stone is slippery, especially in rain, sleet, or, God forbid, battle. And during a siege, this walkway would have been slick with blood, guts, and broken dreams. You follow the wall walk past a machicolation, a projecting gallery at the top of the wall with holes in the floor. These holes let defenders drop projectiles, arrows, or hot substances directly onto attackers below. The trick was not falling through yourself. There are records of children and even small guards slipping through them during peacetime. A sudden squawk startles you. A rook flaps up from a perch and vanishes into the night. Birds loved these high, lonely places. So did ghosts, if the stories are true. You approach the corner turret, a rounded tower rising slightly above the rest of the wall. A tight spiral staircase leads inside. These turrets were both lookouts and sniper dens, but during cold months they became ice chambers, wind screaming through arrow slits, the floor slick with frost. Some castles lined them with straw to prevent guards from freezing mid-watch. Others just rotated shifts so quickly that no one had time to freeze to death before falling asleep. Inside you find the alarm bell. It's rusted, long silent, but back in the day it would have been rung to signal an attack, a fire, or the arrival of the tax collector. Some lords had special coded bell patterns, 2 rings for fire, 3 for invasion, 1 long toll for the pigs are loose again. You look down and spot the postern gate, a secret back exit built into the lower walls of the castle. These were the medieval version of an emergency fire escape. Tiny, narrow, and easily overlooked, they let messengers slip in and out during sieges, but they also presented a risk. If an enemy found the postern gate unlocked or unguarded, they could storm in and take the castle from behind. Literally. You remember the tale of Chateau Gaillard in Normandy, where attackers found a latrine chute that hadn't been properly sealed. They climbed it, silently, then opened the gates from the inside. One careless castle privy cost an entire fortress. As you gaze out over the moonlit countryside, it becomes clear the castle was never just a home. It was a fortress, a weapon, a symbol of power carved from stone. But it was also a claustrophobic trap filled with blind spots, smoke, ice, and paranoia. You make your way back down toward the main stairs. Again, you navigate the tight spirals, watching your step, one hand trailing the wall. You pass a watchman half asleep against a torch bracket. He nods, says nothing. You're not sure if he's real or just part of the structure now. As you reach the great hall, it's dark. The fires have died, but you can still smell mead and roast meat in the air. Tables are cleared, benches shoved aside. This room, by day a place of feasting and law-giving, is now empty, a cold echo chamber of power. Above, a large tapestry depicting a boar hunt stirs in the breeze. Behind it, possibly a hidden stair. Many castles had them, secret passageways for retreat, spying, or sneaking off to see someone not officially approved by the church. You slide the tapestry aside. Nothing, just stone. But the idea lingers. For all their strength, castles were full of lies, hidden rooms, false walls, forged loyalties. Safety here was never complete. It was always a bargain, a hope, a gamble in granite. And yet, for centuries, people lived here, loved here, fought, plotted, prayed, and died within these walls. Because in the end, even the coldest, darkest, most dangerous castle was better than the wild world beyond the moat. You light a torch, you descend another stair. The castle breathes around you. The walls whisper, and you, curious, careful, cold, keep moving forward. The torch in your hand flickers as you descend deeper, the spiral stairs seeming to stretch into forever. The air thickens, mould, moss, damp stone. You've entered the Undercroft, the castle's subterranean realm, less glamorous than battlements, far colder than the feasting halls above, and often far more terrifying. This is where they stored supplies, locked away secrets, and in some castles, chained prisoners. Your boots squelch slightly as you hit the earthen floor. The walls drip with condensation, and the only sound is the slow plink of water echoing through the darkness. You run your hand along the wall and feel iron rings embedded in the stone, relics of shackles, and nearby, a faint, rusty outline on the floor that once might have been, well, you tell yourself it's just spilled wine. Dungeons, as we romanticize them today, weren't always deep pits of horror. Some were merely storage rooms repurposed in times of siege or betrayal, but others, especially in high-security castles, were built deliberately low, narrow, and airless. Prisoners didn't need chains. They couldn't even stand. In Chateau de Loche, there's an infamous cell known as the oubliette, literally the forgetting place. A hole in the floor led to a shaft where prisoners were dropped and quite literally forgotten. No light, no ladder, just a stone womb to die in. Whether every castle used these is still debated. Historians still argue whether oubliettes were common practice or just grim legend exaggerated over time. You press forward through the shadows and find a wine cellar, its barrels long dried. In medieval times, alcohol was safer than water. People drank weak ale all day, even children. A sober medieval nobleman was probably unwell. Near the barrels is a pile of salt bricks, once used to preserve meat through brutal winters or during siege, when the food stores were the difference between survival and surrender. They also preserved bodies when necessary. Salt was gold in the form of crystals, worth hoarding, worth stealing. You pass a pile of rotted wooden crates. One has merchant stamps burned into the side, proof of trade routes still running despite wars. Castles weren't just fortresses. They were hubs of economic and political power, and those cellars held the lifeblood of diplomacy, booze, gold, and leverage. But below even that, through a cramped doorway, you come to the crypt. Now, it's hard to know if you're imagining the temperature drop or if it's truly colder. Either way, goosebumps bloom up your arms as the last of your torchlight glows against rows of carved stone sarcophagi. Lords and ladies, knights and clergy, they're all here, sleeping under carved effigies, hands folded in eternal prayer. Most wore armor into the afterlife. Some were buried with trinkets, rings, or even dogs at their feet. Others, with secrets sewn into their shrouds. Beneath one broken slab, you spot bones. Real, fragile, human bones. Not all bodies were treated equally. Servants, criminals, plague victims. They might have been tossed into mass pits, lime thrown on top, names forgotten. Even in death, rank mattered. Above you, a faint tremor runs through the stone. You imagine the great hall alive again, a feast underway, music echoing down these shafts, completely unaware of the generations stacked beneath their feet. Then finally, something strange. A stone door, partially ajar. Behind it, a sealed escape tunnel. Some castles built them to lead under moats or out to nearby forests. Not always finished, often collapsed, but their purpose was clear. When the battle turned, when the walls were breached, you needed a way out. But here's the kicker. Sometimes they worked both ways. More than one siege has ended in surprise when a spy used an escape tunnel to sneak attackers into the castle. You can imagine it, can't you? One greedy steward opens the way and boom, the castle falls from within. It wasn't always the sword that broke the keep. Sometimes it was a whisper. A breeze stirs through the tunnel mouth. You step closer, but rocks block the way. This path hasn't been clear in centuries. You listen, just in case. Nothing. but your heart thumps a little faster anyway. Back up the stairs you go slowly, into a corridor flanked with old doorways. You open one and step into a chapel, small, dusty, but beautiful even in its neglect. A shaft of moonlight slants through stained glass, blue, red, gold, and lands on a stone altar, its edges smoothed by centuries of elbows and prayers. For all the bloodshed castles saw, they were deeply religious spaces. There were daily services. Chaplains and monks often lived on site. Some nobles had their own personal priests, just in case the gates fell and they needed a hasty confession before things got stabby. In the chapel corner, a reliquary gleams. It's empty now, but once held a saint's finger bone or a splinter of the true cross, or so they claimed. These relics weren't just sacred, they were political capital. A holy relic gave your castle prestige, power, and, apparently, plague protection. Spoiler, it didn't work. You sit for a moment on one of the stone benches, letting the stillness sink in. Above, the castle creaks and groans like it's settling into sleep. So many lives passed through these halls, so many whispers lost in these stones. You stand, stretch, and step quietly back toward the torchlit hall. You're not done exploring. There's one place left to visit. You step out of the chapel, heart slow, footsteps echoing louder than they should. You know where you're going now, the final place every medieval castle kept hidden, protected or flaunted, depending on its reputation. The Lord's Chamber. Up another staircase, this one grand stone banister carved with creeping vines and long-dead heraldry. The higher you climb, the drier the air becomes. The smell of stone gives way to faded cloth, old wood, and traces of perfume or incense, clinging to the walls like memories. You reach the sola, the private quarters of the ruling family. Sola didn't mean sunshine, though it often faced the morning light. It came from solarium, a place of comfort, warmth, solitude. Unlike the Great Hall, this space wasn't for politics or display. It was personal. Tapestries hang on the walls, not just for beauty, but for warmth. Thick cloth insulated the stone. These embroidered scenes show knights battling dragons, saints slaying demons, and lovers beneath trees. But look closer. Sometimes they told local stories with local symbols. This was storytelling before books, before bedtime fairy tales. Each thread whispered a secret to those who knew how to read them. You pass a tall oak writing desk, ink pots still open, quills feathered with age. Few lords could write, fewer still had time. But scribes lived here, copying letters, recording taxes, penning alliances and threats. The entire weight of diplomacy might rest in one poorly worded scroll. The Lord's bed is massive, built high to avoid the cold seeping up from the floor. It has 4 carved posts draped in thick curtains. This wasn't just luxury, it was survival. Winter in a drafty stone castle. Only thick furs, hot stones under the bed, and bed warmers could make sleep bearable. Near the bed, a chest with iron bands sits partially open. You peer in, bits of cloth, old shoes, scraps of silver. A personal treasure box, not always filled with gold, sometimes with letters, tokens, charms. In a world ruled by reputation and rumour, sentimental items could be the most valuable. But the most fascinating object? A mirror. Yes, a medieval mirror. Polished metal, not glass. So distorted you barely see yourself in it. But still, a symbol of vanity, power, and mystery. To own a mirror was rare. It meant wealth. It also meant awareness. The face you showed the world was now something you could practice, perfect, control. On the wall nearby, you find a family tree painted into plaster. Names, crests, faded dates. Some crossed out, some left blank. Bloodlines were everything. A bastard born in the wrong chamber could inherit nothing. A legitimate son from the right womb could rule nations. Castles weren't just fortresses. They were dynastic machines built to protect and display legacy. You walk into the lady's chamber, separated by a carved screen, quieter, softer. There's a spinning wheel in one corner and embroidery hoops still hang by the window. Don't be fooled, needlework wasn't just pastime, it was political. Noble women stitched family emblems, prayer cloths and tapestries that told their own versions of history. Here's something else. Birthing stools, hidden in the corner. Giving birth was one of the most dangerous acts a woman could face. There were no hospitals, just midwives, herbs and prayer. Many castles had birthing chambers designed to be quiet, clean and dim. Some had holy relics placed nearby for protection. And near the hearth, a book of hours, a personal prayer book, often decorated more richly than the Bible itself. Each noblewoman had one. Their pages told the rhythm of the day, matins, lauds, vespers. Prayer punctuated everything, even fear, even childbirth. You wander to the window and look out. The castle courtyard below is asleep. The torches flicker. The stone glows silver in the moonlight. You can almost hear the smith sharpening a blade, the cook yelling for more firewood, a stable boy snoring beneath a haystack. Life here was constant motion, but also deep silence. This was a world where walls had ears and every footstep mattered. One wrong whisper, one glance, one alliance forgotten, and a family could fall, a castle could burn. And yet, it still stands. You've walked the walls, crossed the great hall, descended into darkness, and risen into the warmth of memory. These castles weren't perfect. They were freezing, dangerous, chaotic, and often brutal. But they were miracles of human effort, born of ambition and fear, art and war, politics and prayer. You close your eyes for a moment, standing there in that silent solar. Outside, the stars turn slowly overhead. Inside, the past breathes around you. You are home, for now, inside a castle's long, sleeping dream. Sleep well. And remember, the walls remember everything.